Hey everybody, and welcome to the Joys of Games podcast. This is Collin. Today, I actually recorded a bonus episode for the Joys of Games, and it's not going to be like the normal format that Josh and I normally do. Today, I went to the Portland Retro Game Expo, and while I was waiting in line, I decided to interview one of my good friends named John Garrettson. John is a huge retro gaming enthusiast, so I thought it would be interesting to kind of interview him and get his experiences and joy of retro gaming and put it in this podcast feed. Keep in mind that, like I said, we are in line, so there's going to be a lot of ambient noises you're going to be hearing in the background. Sometimes the mic gets tapped a couple times. You might hear someone saying hello. So the audio quality is not the best, but I think you're all going to really enjoy this episode. It's kind of a deep dive into games past instead of games present. I think you're all going to really enjoy it. So I appreciate you all tuning in and enjoy the show. Thanks. All right. We are at the Portland Retro Game Expo, waiting in line to get inside to find some magical treasures. I'm with my friend John Garrettson, my retro guru.
Hey, what's up, guys?
How you doing, John?
Yeah, doing great. Very happy to be here.
Good. So, I wanted to go over kind of the history of retro gaming with you, because anytime I'm confused about something or curious about history, you tend to know the answers to it. So why don't you give us a backstory of where gaming started with you and where you're at today?
Okay, well, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I've been around gaming, home console gaming, pretty much since the beginning. So that means I'm really old, unfortunately. But I did see the rise of popularity of gaming in the U.S. As a kid, I jumped in at the arcades, so that's kind of where I got my start. I would head up to the arcades with my dad a lot as a young kid, when they were still in their heyday, and they were awesome, like magical places you could go and waste a lot of money. Before everything turned into redemption games and ticket games. And from there, our first console in our house was the NES. So not all the way back. We didn't have an Atari or anything like that. I did later, of course, but I wasn't there at the beginning. So first console was NES, and we evolved from NES to Super Nintendo to 3DO, I went 3DO to I think PlayStation, N64, GameCube, Wii U. And of course, all the peripheral consoles, other consoles that are popular at the time, those were my dedicated consoles that I spent the most time on as I went through it.
So that's the history of consoles you have. So you have a lot of attachment to specific series. What is the first... You were telling me about a story about experience you had with your dad growing up, your first gaming all-nighter, which is important, I think, to a lot of gamers out there. I want you to kind of talk about that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So... So in our house, like the NES was the first major console we had, and of course it opened up and helped us create a lot of really great gaming memories. And one of my favorite gaming memories, I think, from that generation was spending time playing games with my dad. And so the NES was actually his, and we would play, and eventually it kind of evolved into the kid system. But in the beginning, we would kind of sit around and watch him play, help him play, and we had this really awesome game that we got for Christmas one year. I still remember like opening the wrapping on the present and seeing the tan box underneath. And it was a game called Faxanadu. It was a side-scrolling RPG. It was a lot like Zelda 2. And we put this game in and we started playing it. And my dad would play it. We sit around and watch him and kind of give him advice and tips. And he would try the things that we would suggest. But one of the coolest memories from that was when going into the weekend, my dad popped the game in, and we would start playing with him. And as the night wore on, he entered into this really kind of dark, creepy part of the game called Mistown. And the music is really kind of weird and eerie. If you guys get a chance to go look at it on YouTube, because the music will get stuck in your head in a bad way. It's great music, but it'll freak you out.
Was it Japanese developed, or was it?
Yeah, so Xanadu was... there was a game called Xanadu in Japan for the PC engine. It was developed by Falcom and like the Yes people, right? And Nintendo wanted an installment of that game on their system. So they had Hudson Soft develop a version of it for the Famicom. And that's where the name came from. It was Famicom Xanadu. Xanadu.
Okay.
And so they brought it to the U.S. And it was really a masterwork of a game. It was an awesome game. The music was great. And so he's going into this place called Misttown. It's this freaky place. As it's kind of getting dark outside, we're going into this part of the game. And we kind of journeyed through Misttown throughout the course of the night. And before I realized any time had passed, I kind of look over. And I'm like 10 years old at the time, right? So I'm a little kid. And I see underneath the curtains the morning light starting to drift in from outside. And I couldn't believe I just stayed up all night playing a video game. My dad had actually let me do it. So I was like super excited. I felt like a grown up. Like, I just stayed up all night. And then as he kind of passed Misttown and we were getting out of there, the sun was coming up outside and we entered into a land called Daybreak in the game. It was so perfect, right? It was like virtual reality before there was virtual reality. You're living virtual reality. Right. So we get into Daybreak and the sun comes up outside and it was just really awesome, like being at his side and being able to do that together. Later, about a month later, he would actually beat the game while I was away at school, church or something. And I remember my brother called me up where I was and said, "Hey, Dad, just beat Vexation." And I remember being so angry, I yelled at him. And I was like, "How would you let him beat it without me being there?" But so when I went home, I said, "Dad, you got to beat the boss again because you got to show me the ending." So it was before YouTube. You could have just gone and actually watched the ending of the games, right? So yeah, that was a really cool memory. I remember feeling so special, like growing up, and made it all the way through the night with him.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember my first early memories of the NES is my dad playing Tetris. And they had, split screen Tetris, so he would let me play, and I would always get the kill screen, like almost right off the bat. But I'd always try to beat him, but I never could. But I just remember going back to the game because you said the music was really good in that game. The music in Tetris, it sticks in your head even now.
Type C was my favorite music from Tetris.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, and then obviously there's the Super Mario Brothers, and then my sister and I were super obsessed with Turtles, so we played Turtles a lot on our NES.
Collin, do you like Turtles?
I hate Turtles.
Oh,
I hated that game.
I thought you were going to say that I like Turtles.
No. You gotta ask that zombie kid over here. He's probably here somewhere, right?
Turtles Arcade, though, right? Turtles Arcade.
Turtle Arcade was great, yeah. Especially when they did the port down the road. You could play on console, so... So past NES, obviously your gaming lineage doesn't stop there. Where did you go from there?
So NES, we went to Super Nintendo next.
Yeah.
And we were kind of late to the Super Nintendo party. A lot of people had Super Nintendo before we did. We stayed with the NES for a long time. So because a lot of my friends had Super Nintendo before we did, the anticipation just continued to build and build, right? I remember going over to we'd go to our relative's house and they'd pull out their Super Nintendo for us to play, and I was always jealous, but it was a magical, system.
Yeah.
You see those bright colors and vibrant sound, you really want it.
And the controller didn't hurt your hands when you held it.
Exactly. It was really awesome. And so, of course, I remember the day we got our Super Nintendo at home. My dad bought Super Nintendo for the family. He let us pick out a game with the console, and we didn't have internet, so we kind of bought games in those days based off of the cover art.
Okay.
And like the description on the back of the box, right?
So like Mega Man 2, it's the same thing.
I think I would have stayed away from that one based on the cover art. But yeah, kind of, you get the point. So as we're flipping through the games in the store, we settled on one that we thought looked interesting. It was called Prince of Persia.
Okay.
So we took that thing home and... Hey,
how are you?
Eric, how's it going?
Good to see you. I want these guys.
Right on. Sound like
of course, you guys are right next to each other.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the podcast.
No.
So, we got home, we hooked that Super Nintendo up and, to our TV, and, TV console, like wood around it on the floor, it was one of those kind of TVs.
Yeah.
We couldn't even use the, there were no AV jacks. We had to use the little, 2-prong things on the back of the set. But, we hooked that system up. And I remember plugging the Prince of Persia cartridge into the system and hitting the power button. And when that system came on, and the Konami logo rang down with the little Konami chime, the colors were so rich, the sound was so amazing. We were totally sucked in and lost in the adventure of trying to save the princess. within 2 hours. And every little detail of that game, because it was on that high fidelity at the time system, the rattling of the floorboards, the grating of the stone tiles and the traps, the spikes when they came, the music was great. So we played Prince of Persia and we mastered it. My brother went through that game and mastered that one, and I fell in love with the system. All the RPGs that were big for it, the Final Fantasy series. Final Fantasy VI, I think, is still my favorite RPG of all time. Cyan Garamond is my favorite RPG character. Samurai with the strength of 100 men. The music, the upper scene of Final Fantasy VI, Zelda: Link to the Past, of course. Everybody loves that game. But so many great memories with Super Nintendo, and so my friends were all Sega kids, and so I'd go to their house and we'd play the Sega systems.
Sure.
And they were okay. I like Sega.
They were okay.
Sega was all right. To me, they always kind of like it were. I know this is probably going to get a lot of people angry, but they were like the wannabe Nintendos. So I was happy that we were the Nintendo house and they were the Sega house. But it was cool because I got to kind of see all the cool Sega stuff too and be exposed to that at that time.
Yeah. I didn't have a Super Nintendo growing up, so I don't have the same memories as a lot of people do. I went from NES to 64, but when I did go over to my cousin's house, I just remember seeing Donkey Kong Country for the first time, and I'm like, holy crap, look at these graphics. That monkey looks real. This is nuts.
Those graphics still look good today.
Yeah, they still look good today because of the art design on that. I mean, I would say most of those retro games look good. It's when you go into 3D world, when you look at 3D graphics today from 3D graphics back then, they don't hold up so well. I think it's interesting though that you started with Prince of Persia and not Super Mario World.
Yeah, well, I played Super Mario World when I would go and play Super Nintendo at other people's houses before that, and it was awesome, right? Great game. But when we're starting up, we wanted to start off with something that we hadn't played and seen before. Start off on a fresh adventure.
Yeah, there's a hardcore game to start off with.
Yeah, but it's weird because we would buy games that way most of the time back then. And I got very lucky. I don't know how, but without any internet, no reference from anything, we always stumbled on. It seems like what ended up being the classic games of every generation.
Yeah.
I remember playing Secret of Monkey Island on the Sega CD, which later would become this huge cult classic that everybody loves, the Monkey Island series.
Sure.
I got into Super Nintendo RPGs primarily because I just happened to have a friend in school who was an artist, and he was dead set on becoming an artist for Squaresoft. He wanted to grow up and graduate and go become an artist for Squaresoft. So, and he was a great artist.
Yeah.
He was amazing, way better than I was. And I liked the joke back then too, and I still do. But he would buy every Squaresoft game come out, and it was like the John Garrettson rental system. He would basically give me a title. I would take it home and play it until I beat it, and when I give it back to him, he would exchange it out for the next one. So through him, his name was Scott Battleday, awesome friend. But through him, I got to play Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, Final Fantasy II, Final Fantasy III, 4 and 6, right? 2 and 3, Chrono Trigger, all of those games I played because, again, if I hadn't had that friend, I would have not had the opportunity to play those games. And it was always like that with us. We just kind of always stumble upon what ended up being the best games, and it's great to have those memories.
That's cool. It's funny you say that too, because we were just talking earlier about Nintendo Power, the Retro Game Expo. Their kind of theme they're doing this year for their merchandising is an homage to the first issue of Nintendo Power. And you were saying that you had a lot of Nintendo Power, but you didn't read that back then for new games coming out that you wanted for those systems.
When you're a kid, your income's a little limited, right?
Right.
So you'd look at them in the store, maybe. Nintendo Power, if I remember right, was kind of it was a premium magazine.
Okay.
It was, cost a couple bucks, and it always seemed like it was really cool quality. But I liked it more as a kid for I think the comics in it. They would have
I remember those
comics, the Zelda comics,
for sure.
And I love the the layouts. They would have the strategies where they would basically put all the screenshots of the levels together and line them up in a row so you could actually see maps and stuff. That was awesome. But when I got older and I had money. When I was older than I probably should have been to do this, I ended up subscribing to Nintendo Power.
Yeah.
It was around the time the N64 was ending, and so I got kind of my run of Nintendo Power, which I still have all of them, kind of runs from the last half of the N64 life cycle through the launch of the GameCube, through the launch of the Wii, and I think it tapered out right before the Wii U launched. But yeah, love those magazines.
Yeah.
They were awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely miss having a subscription-based magazine coming home dedicated to one console, but I understand times change, the internet, all that fun stuff. So, past Super Nintendo, where do you go from here?
So that's where my gaming life takes a rather obscure and I guess it could be humiliating detour. Because I fell in love with a system that is not generally favorably looked on now as people look back. But at like 12 years old, or 13, when everyone was playing Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, one of my half brothers came to visit. I think it was like for Easter or something, and he brought with him his 3DO. And
Now, well, let's pause on that. So I never heard of the system before until I met you. You had explained to me. So let's explain to the listening audience exactly what the 3DO is, who made it, when it came out, why it's so important to you as well.
Sure. So it actually is a pretty important system, I think, in the grand scheme of things, because the system was the kind of the vision of Trip Hawkins, who was one of the founders of EA.
Mm-hmm.
So Trip Hawkins, who had he came, I think he worked for IBM for a while, but he went over to found EA with some people, and he eventually left EA because he wanted to create his own gaming console and enter the gaming console market. And enter that race. So he got together some of the guys who had worked on with Atari for a long time, and together they created a system for a game that was like kind of a template for a gaming system. They could then copyright that template and sell the rights to making that console off to different companies that wanted to jump into consoles.
Interesting.
So some of those manufacturers who ended up manufacturing 3DO were Panasonic, Sanyo, Goldstar. They all made versions of 3D.
Oh, so it wasn't just, it's like kind of like what they're doing with Steambox, where it's just like these different companies just putting stuff together.
Yeah, pretty much.
Way before its time.
Yeah,
interesting.
Right. So,
okay.
so they had a set of specs that the companies had to meet, but they could manufacture their system with whatever design or style they wanted to, as long as they met those specs.
Wow.
And so they put the 3DO out there. It was a very expensive system when it launched. It was ahead of its time. It was about 2 years before the PlayStation went into the market, and it was a CD-based console. They had plans for it that would allow it to play online. This was a system that launched in late '92, early '93. It had video playback on discs at a time that was long before DVDs came out. It was kind of a contemporary to Laserdisc, but the discs were like CD size.
Interesting.
And you could get a video cartridge installed on 3DO, whereas most 3DOs later came with a video cartridge installed in them to let you watch the movies. One of the coolest things about the 3DO that I loved was that the controller. So there were two really novel things about the controller. One was that it had a headphone jack on the controller itself, the volume control.
No kidding.
So as you're sitting back in your console with a hi-fi, stereo system, you plug in your headphone and cut off the sound of the outside world. We get total control right on the controller, and it's a little thing. And now, right, we all have wireless headsets.
Sure.
But back then,
that's forward thinking.
It was awesome.
That's crazy.
And instead of having multiple ports for multiplayer on the system, the controllers with 3DO daisy chained together. So there was a port on every controller where you could plug in another controller.
Wow.
And you could go up to 8 players on the console. So like FIFA, which was, I think, if it wasn't the first, it was one of the first installments of FIFA created by EA, was for the 3DO. You could have 8 players on the field playing at the same time on the same TV.
Holy crap.
It was amazing.
That is nuts.
So anyways, it was really kind of state-of-the-art system at the time. It launched, I think, at $700. And it rendered 3D graphics, like I said, 2 or 3 years before the PlayStation would come out. So when my brother brought it and showed it off to us, my jaw literally hit the ground. I think it was Crash and Burn was the game. There's 3D, what I thought was 3D models of cars. There was highlighting to the colors, and everyone else was playing Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, side-scrolling pixels, which I love.
Right.
But here was 3D for the first time. It's like someone had taken the veil off of my eyes, and I was seeing a different reality. You look back on those graphics now, they're awful.
Sure.
The early 3D is I think the worst, right? Type of graphic as far as you said, holding up over time. But still at the time it looked like a Pixar movie to me.
Right.
It was so amazing. So I fell in love with the system. I knew I could never afford it. But it left a mark on me, and I knew that eventually I would have to have it.
Yeah, because what, $700 back then is like more than $1,000 now, I'm assuming, like with inflation.
With inflation, I just saw a report. I think it was Game Informer that did a report recently that showed the cost of systems with inflation and how they ranked against each other. And the 3DO is by far the most expensive system ever released.
Wow. Yeah, how does any kid afford that? Like, that almost seems like they were marketing towards the adult gamer before the adult gamer was kind of a thing, I guess.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they said it would be like equivalent to like $1,800.
Holy
spending
crap.
$1,800 on a gaming system.
You can buy a gaming system or a car. It's your choice.
Exactly. That's how it was back then, too. And unfortunately, I feel kind of bad for the people who spent $700 for a 3DO because while there are a lot of great games for it, and there really are a lot of gems on the system that are that most people overlook, there's a lot of really bad gems on the system, too. So if you were one of the people who bought a $700 3DO and you just happened to pick the wrong game, man, that would have been a really bitter evening, I think, when you put that thing in.
Was this I'm assuming this is, well, you said it's Super Nintendo time, so this is when the prices of games were just kind of all over the place at retailers. Like, basically, they could charge whatever they wanted. There was no, like, every game is $60 or every game is $40. This is like, I remember buying 64 games that were like $80, $90 sometimes, depending on where you bought it. So
especially those, like, Japanese RPGs.
Yeah.
So, anyways, like, I knew I had to get a 3DO. I knew I couldn't afford it. So I didn't get it for a long time.
Yeah.
And all my friends were getting systems around me. My best friend, Scotty, who was a Sega kid, he ended up getting a PlayStation and N64. I remember playing Tomb Raider for the first time with him and how amazing that was.
Yeah.
And seeing Pilot Wings on the N64 at his house and how amazing that was. And, so I got a taste of that stuff. I was always a little jealous. I would have never admitted to him, right? I thought he was so cool because he had all this stuff. And all I had was my Super Nintendo, and I played Chrono Trigger like a million times on a black and white TV. I loved it so much I would actually play it on a black and white TV.
Sure.
But one day we went into like a Son of Etc. store together, me and Scotty.
Which is now GameStop.
Yeah, which became GameStop,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was actually an area manager of GameStop when that merge happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there when they actually became GameStop. But I miss Son of Etc.
Yeah, me too.
And Funko Land.
Yeah.
But I walked in, and top right corner of the store, in the top stock, I saw a 3DO box. And 3DO box was pretty distinct. It had like really bright colors, like blue, green, red. I looked up and I saw that up there, and I just, casually asked the guy, not really expecting anything. I said, "Hey, how much is that 3DO on top?" And he goes, he literally turns and goes, "Oh, that thing?" He goes, "Man, I've been trying to get rid of that for months because no one will buy it." So I'm like, "Okay, well, how much will you sell for?" He goes, "I'll tell you what." He goes, "I'll make you a deal. I'll give you that 3DO, brand new in the box. And I got this like binder of like 3DO games that the 3DO company gives us to demo for customers. There's like 20 games in there. And I got this extra controller here and some other accessories." He put it all on the counter, this little mountain of 3DO goodness. And
What's up, man?
hey, how's it going?
How are you? Sorry, this podcast.
No, it's no problem, man.
I didn't know that. Sorry.
So there's this we can edit it out. Right? That's why everything's works. So it's okay. He goes, "I'll give you this whole mountain of 3DO goodness, $99." Dude, I looked at my friend. He looked at me. We couldn't believe it. I slapped my $99 on the counter. My first paycheck from McDonald's. It was gone that fast. But
to be a kid.
yes, it was the first system I ever bought for myself.
Cool.
So it was very special to me. A system I had already longed to have for a while. I paid for it with my own money. And we took it home and we tried out like 20 different 3DO games over the course of that weekend. And I just remember being so proud because, like, even though the system was kind of fading out by the time that I got it, for that weekend at least, it was my friend playing systems or games on my system and experiencing them for the first time. And it was a system I could call my own. So the 3DO I became attached to it. There's an emotional attachment there.
Sure.
And so I set myself, much later in life, when I had a job that could actually support it, I told myself that someday I would have every 3DO title released in the U.S. So I've been working on that now for many years.
Yeah.
And I now am, I think I'm 19 or 20 titles away from playing every title in the 3DO library that came out in the United States.
That's awesome. Out of all the 3DO games that you play or own, just name a few of them that are your favorites and why.
Yeah, so Alone in the Dark.
Okay.
The first Alone in the Dark game came out on 3DO. It was a game that could only have been played on PC at that time. No other console really could run it. So the fact that you had this kind of, at the time, high-end PC game that could run on a home console was really special.
Yeah.
And that game freaked me out.
Yeah, that game was kind of like a Resident Evil knockoff kind of thing, or Resident Evil's knockoff of that is more so is what I mean.
Yeah, it was. It was kind of the first survival horror game. In 3D, and it was so new to that genre that that genre name didn't even exist yet. They didn't know what to call it.
Interesting.
But yeah, you wandered around a haunted house, and there was kind of like a Lovecraftian story that played out there. 3D enemies and puzzles. It was a lot like Resident Evil, and Resident Evil actually took some elements from it when they designed their system. In fact, Alone in the Dark, you could play as either a guy or a girl character, so you could choose, kind of like Chris and Jill, right? And the music was really scary and cool. So that game was awesome. Alone in the Dark was great. The controls were kind of clunky, and the combat system was whack. If you go back and try to play it now, good luck. But back then it was cool. So Alone in the Dark was awesome on the system.
You said the music is creepy. For 3DO, did it have like CD-based music, kind of like the PlayStation, or is it more like MIDI, kind of like 8-bit kind of like sounding?
It's kind of in between. I think it was like that early Red Book audio stuff.
Okay, so kind of like what 64 did type of thing?
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, it was simulated instruments.
Okay.
But a lot of 3DO games did use actual instruments because they took advantage of that CD format.
Yeah.
That was out for the first time. But the music just really added to the environment. And I remember being more scared of playing Alone in the Dark than playing Resident Evil later when I played Resident Evil. Out of This World was one of my favorite games on the Super Nintendo, and the 3DO version was awesome. Flashback was another side-scroller for the 3DO that was really cool. Escape from Monster Manor was like a Doom-style game set in. Imagine if you were like in the haunted mansion of Disneyland, and the whole game takes place as you're going through this haunted mansion, but it's Doom-style game.
So it's kind of like Ghostbusters, but way more hardcore.
Yes, yeah. Actually, Ghostbusters is a good example of what that game would be. That game was really cool. Gex was a side-scrolling platform.
Oh, Gex, yeah. I remember playing Gex, but obviously not on 3DO because it was ported, right?
It was ported. So Gex was made by Crystal Dynamics.
Oh, really? Yeah. Tomb Raider guys.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, you're doing Tomb Raider now. Crystal Dynamics was one of the first exclusive developers for the 3DO. They were like a second-party developer.
Okay.
Because of Trip Hawkins' ties to EA became almost like a first-party developer for 3DO too. So all the EA stuff came to 3DO. So you had Madden and FIFA and that stuff. And I was never a big sports guy, but they did some really cool stuff like Need for Speed. The first Need for Speed was a 3DO exclusive.
Wow. All right.
And it had awesome physics and 3D before the PlayStation. I remember a friend of mine telling me a story about how when he got that game and put it in, he spent his entire weekend just running the car into walls because you could actually see crash damage on cars and see it like flip over and stuff in 3D.
That's actually a really smart choice of a game because if you look at racing games now, like the hardcore racing fans, they have a lot of money. Like they have crazy setups where they'll have, Forza running on like, their 4K monitors and PCs with this crazy like car rig that is simulated, like spend thousands of dollars on racing those, thousands of dollars on throttle. So like to have a premium racing experience at that point, I guess could be technically the inception of like the hardcore racing genre.
I think you're right. And the developers of that, EA, the team that worked on it, did a lot of work at that time that had never been done before in trying to capture the realism of the vehicles you were driving. They recorded sounds from the engines of the actual model of cars that you drove in the game. When the cars would shift, what you're hearing is actually the sound of that model car actually shifting. They actually incorporated that into the game. And to this day, a lot of people still feel, who have played that series through, still feel that that game may actually represent the most realistic version of driving those types of vehicles out of any of the Need for Speed games that have ever come out. So a lot of those people still say that. It was a lot of fun for me. Road Rash was another really cool 3DO version. That version of Road Rash was the best out of any of the that came out.
Was that exclusive when it launched, or was it also on the other systems?
That one, I think, I don't know if it was a contemporary to the one on the Genesis. I don't know which one came first.
Okay.
But I do know there was a huge difference in graphics and speed, and you really got a huge sense of speed as you were playing Road Rash on the 3DO. Lucian's Quest was a Japanese RPG developed by Microcabin. Some of those people would later go on to work for Squaresoft. And that game was later turned into a game called Sword and Sorcery. which I think came out for the Saturn.
Okay.
So that was pretty cool to have a JRPG for the 3DO. There weren't a lot because it was more of an American-based system. But little known fact about 3DO that's really cool is that if you look at sales of American consoles now, like Xbox in Japan, they're virtually non-existent. Microsoft has had a hard time marketing and selling the Xbox in Japan.
Sure.
Now, the Japanese market has certain tastes, and I think they're very proud of their video game industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Xbox just hasn't taken off very well over
Yeah, and it makes sense.
Yeah, despite having exclusives made by really prominent Japanese developers. The 3DO, I think, holds the distinction of the only American-based console that actually sold well in Japan, and it was because the primary manufacturer of 3DO console was Panasonic.
Yeah.
Matsushita in Japan. And I think a lot of gamers over there saw a Japanese company developing a console, and they took a chance with it. And so it actually sold really well. There were a lot of exclusive games to the 3DO in Japan that never made their way to the US, but a lot of those are RPGs and games.
Is it region free? Can you, like, if you were to import those games, can you play them on your US 3DO?
Yes.
Awesome.
So that's the cool part. It was really early CD-based technology. The developers didn't think that people could afford
the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, exactly. To pirate CD games at that time. So they didn't really put a lot of region locks into the system. So every game in the Japanese library you can pretty much bring over and play. I believe on the 3DO in the US. There may be a couple exceptions that don't work, but most of them can.
Was there any other markets that it sold well in? Like, did they release it in Europe? Do you know?
Yeah, there was a European 3DO system.
Okay.
It was okay. I think it did about as well as it did in the US. Price was just prohibitive for most people to be able to get into it. The other thing that hurt it was, in order to compete with Nintendo and Sega, who had pretty high licensing fees for their games because they were a popular console and they knew that developers and publishers would pay those fees to get their games on their consoles. 3DO tried to compete with that by having really low licensing fees. If you wanted to get a game onto the 3DO, you only had to pay $2 per disc.
That's awesome.
That was the licensing fee. It was cool because it opened the doors for a lot of companies to get their games on the system. Unfortunately, it meant that they weren't generating a lot of revenue, the 3DO company, and it also meant that a lot of people with really low budgets could actually make games for the system, and that ended up meaning that you had a lot of junk produced for the system. So I think the shovelware hurt it a little bit as well.
Bomber. Okay, so 3DO, it's obviously your passion. Last year, when we met up at the Portland Retro Game Expo, you picked up a game that was developed by a pretty prominent developer nowadays. Do you remember? So, it's a game made by Kojima. What's it called? It was on 3DO.
Police Nuts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you played that one yet?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. What's that game like?
It's awesome.
Okay.
I mean, it's like a point-and-click adventure story, right?
Interesting. Okay.
But with a sci-fi, like noir style setting. It was the precursor, or actually, I think it actually came out after Snatcher. But there are characters in Police Knots that would later show up in the Metal Gear Solid series.
Okay.
Like Meryl Silverberg, I think, is a character in Police Knots, and she shows up as like a police officer in the game. And so later in her career, I guess, she goes on and becomes a part of the special operations that are happening in the Metal Gear Solid series.
That's funny that there's Metal Gear lineage all the way back to 3DO.
3DO, man. Like, a lot of stuff started on 3DO that a lot of people don't realize.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
All right, man. So moving past 3DO, where do you go from there?
So at 3DO, I bought a PlayStation. When the PlayStation came out, of course, I'd already played it at my friend's house. I knew I needed one. Everyone in the world knew that Final Fantasy had become an exclusive to PlayStation. By the time I got mine, it was not out yet, but I knew I had to get a system to play Final Fantasy VII. The game wasn't out yet when I got my system, so I needed something to kind of like tide me over. So I remember walking into the store and like, what can I get that'll tide me over until Final Fantasy VII comes out? And I didn't know what this game was, but I picked the game up, and just based again off the back of the case, and it was a game called Wild Arms. Thank you. Thank you. Sweet. Free Atari.
All right, we just got a free Atari game. That's exciting.
What'd you get?
I got football, used with joystick controllers.
I get football too, used with Joy-Con controller. Uh-oh, this is me.
Whoa, what's going on?
So it was Wild Arms was the game. I didn't have any expectations. I thought, this might be a cool RPG to play. It ended up blowing me away. I fell in love with the Wild Arms series. It was a great game in its own right, not to be overshadowed by any other RPG on the system. So anyways, Final Fantasy VII came out later. I got it, loved it, of course.
Sure.
And I remember, too, at that time, the N64 was about to come out. When it finally launched, I was in the Air Force, and I would go to the BX, which was like the base Walmart, right? Like every paycheck, I'd go there and try to get my N64, and they were sold out forever. I'd go in, sold out. I'd go in the next paycheck, sold out. When I finally walked in there and they had an N64 on the shelf, it was like the holy grail. The clouds parted, the sunlight came down, it like was shining on the system. You could hear the angels singing. When my hands first touched that box and picked it up off the shelf, oh my gosh, I still get chills thinking about it to this day.
Yeah.
I bought a couple games for it that day. I remember I bought Hexen for the N64.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
All right.
And Super Mario 64 was amazing. My exposure to that game was like the kiosks in Walmart, which again, like 3D gameplay, you're stepping into a new reality. It just tore open the boundaries of what a game could be. But I took that thing home, and I love my N64 so much that, and I still laugh about this today. I tell my friends, I told you before, I think. Every time I got done playing my N64, I would disconnect it, put it back in the styrofoam, in plastic, and slide it back into the box. And then the next day when I got home from work, I'd take it out of the styrofoam, hook it back up again, so that every day that I played the game, or the system, I would get that feeling of just having opened it for the first time again.
Wow, all right.
And I did that for a while, and then that got kind of
yeah, that's dedication, man.
Yeah, well, when you first at that point where you're buying your own systems, they mean a lot because the money is hard to come by, and so they're very special to you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I moved on from NES to 64, and I remember begging my dad that Christmas for that system. And, being a mischievous little kid, I sneaked in, I saw it in the closet, and I was just like so excited. So when Christmas Day came, opened it up. I was like that kid in that YouTube video screaming, I got an N64!
Oh, no. That was you?
No, yeah, could have been, but may as well have been. And I remember my dad had bought Shadows of the Empire.
Awesome.
We had got Wave Race, and we got one other game. It was, what was it? Oh, it was NHL, which is very odd because we're not a hockey household. Like, we never really liked hockey, but the story came out later on. My dad said, this is, like, Shadows of the Empire I for sure wanted to get because I'm a big Star Wars fan. But, like, the other games, that's all they had left. He said he looked at basically every retail store in the area. This is around Christmas time, and everyone was sold out of Mario 64.
I believe it.
So we didn't get Mario 64 until January. Like that, we didn't, like, because, it's December, Christmas, we didn't get it until mid-January, because he promised us, he's like, I know you guys really want Mario, I just can't find it anywhere. So we didn't play Mario until January. But that was fine, though, because Shadows of the Empire was so much fun. I played that game to death.
That game was really great. Again, like 3D environments in the Star Wars world.
Wave Race was really good, too, because you have the water effects. Like, it was amazing. Like, I just remember seeing the graphics. Like, when I did finally play Mario, I remember seeing the level where you jump into the metal pit, and you could see, like, the different reflections off the metal, and I'm like, this is it. Gaming can't get better than this. Like, this is the best thing ever.
Gaming will never get better.
It's never better than this. And you were going back to the first time you stayed up all night playing games. My first exposure to that was Ocarina. Ocarina Time was just, like, so mind-blowingly big at the time. And I'd played Zelda on the NES. I never really got far enough because I was pretty young when I played it, so I didn't really understand the secrets and the nuances of that game. And if you look at the original Zelda, I would say it's one of the more difficult ones to wrap your head around, especially like if it's your first entry into that series. So I feel like Ocarina, maybe it's just because it's older, it's a little bit more accessible.
Epic. That game was epic.
Yeah.
I remember the movie trailer, right? Like when you go to the theater and you see the preview for the game on the big screen with the Conan, or it has kind of like epic music.
Really good music,
So awesome.
Yeah.
Have ye what it takes, right? Like,
yes, absolutely. And the first game that I ever bought with my own money, not from like birthdays or Christmas money or all that, like money I saved up for months and months and months, was actually Majora's Mask. And it had the 3D looking cover, it's like the deluxe edition, all gold, like
premium, super premium.
And I just have such a fond memory for that game. I've talked about that a lot on this podcast, and it's important to me because obviously it's the first game I ever bought. It's important to me because it was the follow-up to Ocarina of Time, which I spent so much time playing, and it was so unique because it had all these different transformations of Link. It was a much more smaller Zelda experience, which was kind of refreshing in a way, and it had so many side missions, like just an absurd amount of side missions in that game. Which
I loved how you could just pick any random NPC and follow them around their daily routine.
Yeah.
I mean, it felt a little bit like a stalker, but I didn't really care, right? It was a video game, and it was cool to see what they would do. And that's kind of, a lot of games do that now, but that was like one of the first games where you could actually do that.
Yeah, and the mechanics of it's so like complicated. You think about it, you're like, okay, so if I do this, if I interact with this person at this time, this happens. If I interact with this time, then this happens. Like, it was really, really crazy what they did in the short amount of time, because that was Miyamoto stepping away and oh my gosh, like his name. Yeah, stepping in, right? That was his first game.
I think it was his first directing game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy. What a great first outing.
Yeah, my N64, I mean, my Zelda 64 Ocarina of Time story was really cool too, because I actually had to go on like a Zelda style fetch quest during the launch of that game in real life, right? Like, so I had pre-ordered mine,
Okay.
so I knew I was getting it, right? And I had a friend who was totally kind of anti-Nintendo at the time. He said, I don't want it. Like, I'm not going to get Zelda. That's for kids, what he was saying at the time. And he held that stance all the way until the day the game came out. And then, the day the game came out, he was totally sucked into it. And he regretted his decision. He was like, I really need to get this game. I need to go get it. So in order to help my friend Mike get his copy of Ocarina of Time, I said, let's go. I jumped in the car, and we drove to the nearest store. I think it was Funko Land. And we ran in there and said, hey, do you got a copy of Ocarina of Time? Of course, they were sold out. The guy goes, no, all we have, I'm sorry, all we have are pre-orders, right? Copies for pre-order customers. So we were bummed out. And he goes, before we left, he goes, I tell you what, he goes, at Sears, if you pre-order the game over there, they were giving away this like pre-order promo. I think it was like a pack of like figurines or something, like Zelda figurines.
Oh, wow.
I really want that pack of figurines, but I can't. I didn't pre-order over there, right? So I can't get it. And it could have been a T-shirt or a music CD. It was some kind of premium like pre-order bonus. He goes, if you can find a way, and I think he was joking, but he's like, if you find a way to give me one of those, like I'll let you take one of these pre-order copies, right? He didn't know what he opened up. So we're like, okay, we're gonna get it. We jumped in the car, we drove over to Sears. We ran in to Sears and we said, hey, listen, you guys are giving away this thing with pre-orders. We didn't pre-order here, but is there any way we can get one? He goes, no, you laughed at us, right? It's like, these are for pre-order customers only. All right, we're kind of bummed out. He goes, why? He goes, at this other retailer, I think it was Kmart, he goes, they're giving away this such and such thing. If you could find a way to get that for me, I'd really like one. Maybe I could hook you up with one of these pre-order promos. So we drove over to that place, right? We ran in, we're like, hey, do you have one of these? Can we get one? No. It literally happened at like 3 different retailers. We finally were able to get a pre-order promo one of them to take back to the next one, to take back to the next one, exchange, to take back to the first one. And the guy at Funko Land said, okay, I can't believe you got this. He goes, but I'll sell you a copy of the game. And he sold us a copy that actually had been pre-ordered by somebody else. So I feel really bad about that to this day. But what I feel even worse about is that the copy that we got, the customer was coming in to pick up that copy as we were finishing our transaction. So I heard him talking to the clerk as we were walking out. A good gamer would have turned around and done the right thing. I was 18. I was not a good gamer. Like, or maybe I was too good of a gamer. We took that thing, we bolted, and my friend had a copy of Ocarina of Time. But it was so cool going on that little like Zelda style fetch quest. Just like if you were in the game trying to accomplish a mission.
It's such a weird thing to, nowadays, you really don't have to pre-order a lot of the really big games. Most retailers have plenty of them and you can buy everything digitally. So, like, that idea of having to wait sometimes weeks for more copies because it's cartridge-based is pretty interesting.
And it was a different world back then.
Yeah, absolutely. So, 64 and PlayStation. You went over PlayStation a little bit. Let's go over, like, 64 games. What was your favorite games? What's the best experience you had with that?
64, again, has so many great games. Multiplayer on GoldenEye, the first, in the dorm rooms on the Air Force Base, which is basically like a college environment. We'd have people would come on, we'd play GoldenEye all the time. Perfect Dark was awesome. Banjo-Kazooie, both of the Zelda games. Mischief Makers, one of my favorite N64 games. It was so cool. The Donkey Kong 64 games, Jet Force Gemini.
Oh, that's another good one, yeah. I played Glover a lot. I really liked that one. Yeah, it's a weird game, but I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I don't know why. Blast Core is another one that I played.
I never played Blast Core either.
Oh, man. It's a crazy game.
I heard it was really good, though. That was rare, right?
Yeah, that was the time, too, when I was really getting into, Japanese animation, so, Gundam and stuff, and there was, an option where you could be the little guy and go into a giant robot and just destroy everything. It was really, really cool.
Castlevania 64.
That's the only Castlevania I've ever played, and I love that game. So,
I think I love the chicken. Like you eat the meat and the sound effect that it makes.
it's weird. Yeah, it's really cool though.
Little things stick with you, or the sound of the footsteps as he's walking on the concrete. Camera control is horrible.
Oh yeah. What are you gonna do?
It only had one joystick.
They really did a good job though with like Mario 64 and Ocarina, like how to figure out what you're gonna do with the camera with the Z targeting, and then the C buttons on the 64 you can kind of arrange and figure out what's going to work camera-wise for you. So that was a smart workaround, at least for first party.
That was masterful. First 3D, like big open world exploration adventure game, and then Zelda the first time.
Yeah.
They were awesome.
Absolutely.
Mario Kart, right, for N64.
Oh yeah, Mario Kart. Can't forget that one. That's one of the best Mario Kart games ever.
I think it's still my favorite Mario Kart.
It's still my favorite too, yeah.
Diddy Kong Racing was really cool.
Yeah, like Conker before Conker came out. When Conker was a nice little squirrel and not a filthy little animal.
That's true. Conker was another one that I actually liked on 64. I played that one. Snowboard Kids.
Oh yeah, Snowboard Kids.
I don't know why. I really love that game. I know you like that game.
Oh yeah, I really wish Atlas would release that game because I just. That one and the second one especially, like just so well done racing games.
It's really cool. Paper Mario, the first Paper Mario game on N64, I really like that one too.
I played Pokemon Snap a lot. That's why I was really into Pokemon to the point where they had little kiosks at Blockbuster Video where you could take your. I'm trying to remember how I took it there. Was it Game Boy? No, it was a memory card. You could take the 64 memory card, plug it into a little kiosk, and then you could print off like actual stickers and pictures of that. I just remember doing that and begging my dad. My dad being like, "This is so stupid, but all right, I guess I'll do it." Because that's how my dad was. Like, I love my dad, and he was pretty firm on things that he really didn't like, but other things there's just like, all right, I'm just gonna make the kids happy and just do it this one time. So
that's really cool.
64, like that's just.
The only thing with the N64 that I kind of wish had been different was they were not an RPG machine, right? Like they didn't have hardly any RPGs for the system. I remember when they were making Quest 64, and I thought it was going to be an RPG.
Oh no!
That was going to, because he was some of the ones on the PlayStation, and I love my PlayStation and all the RPGs on that system, and I played a ton of them. But I was like, oh, finally, N64 is going to get an RPG. Yeah. I picked up my 64. I was so proud of it on the way home. I was looking at the book. I was showing my brothers, like, look, this game's going to be great. I plugged that game in. I was broken hearted. Right? It broke my heart. I'm sure some people probably like the game.
Yeah.
But coming out of Final Fantasy and going into Quest 64 was not good.
And that's the thing I think with 64 why it didn't have RPGs is a lot of Japanese makers were looking at the cost of developing a PlayStation versus 64 and also the room. Like the room to put as much data on disc versus cartridge. Like I think that's where they all just flocked to. So
yeah, absolutely. And so we had both. We had the best of both worlds. We had the best 3D platformers and adventure games on the N64 and all the RPGs on PlayStation.
Right.
But yeah, from N64, at that point in time, after PlayStation 1 and N64 kind of ended their life cycle, I kind of became a Nintendo exclusive gamer, really. I stood in line for the launch of the, well, actually, I can't forget the Dreamcast, like 99, like, I did stand in line for the Dreamcast. And that line was huge. I love my Dreamcast, it was really cool. But it was short-lived, unfortunately, and we'll skip past that and move on to GameCube. So,
well, Dreamcast is actually the first console that I ever bought with my own money.
Oh, that's your first?
Yeah, and this was way after it died, like way after it died. And the reason why I bought it was from Sonic Adventure. So I was not a Sega kid growing up, but for whatever reason, my parents got us a Game Gear instead of a Game Boy. And I played Sonic on that, and that's why I got my attachment. Yeah, I attached to Sonic, and obviously I played a lot of like the Capcom games. Like I played Lion King the game, Little Mermaid the game. There's like a Power Rangers licensed game, so like a lot of it was basically my licensed machine with Sonic as well. So seeing Sonic Adventure, like after going from 64 and seeing that, I was like, wow, this looks really cool. Like
it looks so cool. It was so fast.
And the scene where he's like running at the camera and there's a big like whales coming down. I was like, yeah, I gotta get this. So I remember getting the Dreamcast for just like dirt cheap, and I got Soul Blade, and I got that, and I got Crazy Taxi, and
see now I feel bad because I was gonna skip over the Dreamcast, and you reminded me of how amazing it was.
They're such good titles. Like it really is a weird parody to the Wii U. Like it's got like 15 really great games, and then after that, it's kind of
That's true. I mean, Disney Magical Kingdom Racing, right? Like, that's gonna be one of the greatest games of all time. No,
I played that.
I did too, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
I think I was looking for a Mario Kart Next Generation.
Sure.
But I actually have Blue Stinger, Resident Evil Code Veronica for the Dreamcast. I think that's where the game actually first came out.
Really? Okay. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I would think it was an exclusive at first. I think it was great for the Dreamcast. But both Sonic, Sonic Adventure games too, and the VMU and how like state of the art that thing was. The mini Game Boy kind of that you just take out of the controller.
Yeah, it was really interesting. That really was, I think that was the first online console, one that actually had an online service because you could play Phantasy Star Online. And that went on for years.
You're right. In fact, I never played that, but my wife, she loved Phantasy Star Online.
Yeah.
She played that with her family when they were all separated, and that was their way to kind of connect.
That's cool.
Remotely. And she was really into that. I could never get it to connect. Like, I tried to connect my Dreamcast online, and it just would never work for me for some reason. I don't know why. I remember being frustrated one afternoon, spending like 4 hours trying to get it to link up. It wouldn't do anything for me.
Yeah, see, I never played online with the Dreamcast. Like, I played Phantasy Star Online when they ported it to the original Xbox, and I played hundreds upon hundreds of hours. And it's funny because, like, it wasn't really a game that I enjoyed playing, but I enjoyed the social aspect. I could talk to my friends while we're just doing like grindy quests, and I think that was just like a perfect storm at that time in my life. But yeah, so past Dreamcast, we're going on to GameCube.
Yeah, so GameCube that was actually the first Nintendo system I ever stood in line for.
Okay.
And we went down at like 1 in the morning on the launch of the GameCube day. We thought we'd be the first ones in line. We ended up being the second people in line at our local Best Buy. Me and my brother took my brother down with me. And we stood in line there until almost opening time. Best Buy would not open early. I guess we thought they would for a console. We're standing in that line. We see the workers inside. No one's coming out to say anything to us. Eventually, like, I don't know, 9 o'clock rolls around. They're still not open. I think they opened at 10 o'clock. And one guy breaks out of the line. Now, at this point, the line had gotten really big. It was like wrapping around the building. And one guy breaks up and goes, I'm going to go see if Target has any GameCube. And he walks down the street and everyone laughs at him because he lost his place in line and everybody take his spot. And it was about 15 minutes later that same guy came marching back towards us with a GameCube lofted above his head, triumphantly smirking because he had one before any of us. And you should have seen the chaos that ensued as soon as he did that. The entire line broke. It was a mad dash to Target. Everybody reassembled down there in a different order than we were in the Best Buy line. Everybody bought their GameCube at Target. And Target would give away these like GameCube shares. Like you buy a system and 2 games. You got some kind of like little lame like GameCube, but it was a GameCube.
Why not?
So I took my GameCube home, and that became my dedicated system. I ignored Xbox. Unfortunately, I missed out on a lot of good games and everything. Also, PlayStation 2. I played some games there, but I probably missed out on a lot of classics because I was playing my GameCube. And I can't say I regret it. I love playing GameCube.
Oh, yeah. It's one of their best systems ever made. So at launch, what did you pick up?
I think if I remember right, I went home with Luigi's Mansion and Star Wars Rogue Squadron.
Oh yeah. That was really good.
And I think they had Wave Race too.
Yeah, they had Wave Race too. Yeah.
I went home with those 3 games, I think, and we popped them in. And kind of like you with the N64, because sat there and marveled at the modern effects in Wave Race for a little while.
Yeah.
Star Wars. The graphics in that game. I look at video now. How many years? We're like 15 years away from like the launch of the GameCube or something. The graphics still good.
Yeah, that's the thing is I think once we get to that GameCube art decision, a lot of the games, the art style of those games, because if you look at the GameCube, it was actually more powerful than the Xbox and the PS2 in just raw power, but the problem with it is the disc inhibited a lot of that stuff. But like you look back at those games, like you look at Resident Evil 4, like it still looks good, and I think it'll still, because the art direction of that system, it'll still look good 10 years from now. So Smash Bros. Was delayed, right? It was supposed to hit launch, but it didn't hit Melee.
I think you're right about that.
Okay.
I wasn't following the launch of Smash very closely at that time. I had played a little bit of Smash on N64, but I didn't get really too heavy into it. I didn't play it too much. And then when the GameCube one came out, that's when I really kind of got into it because of all the extra content they put into it as far as the more minor characters.
Yeah, they had
those trophies.
really weird characters in there, in a good way. Like they had really obscure but awesome. Like only the hardcore fans would really really dig into that. Yeah. Yeah, the GameCube. I don't think I got a GameCube until Wind Waker came out, and I was one of those people like everyone else. I scoffed at it. I'm like, this is a cartoon. This looks stupid. Like I don't want to play this. And then I had a sleepover at a couple of my friends' house, and they went to bed. I played their Wind Waker all night long, and I was like, I have to get one of these systems. Like I have to. So
yeah, living, breathing world. I'll be honest with you. I don't know that Nintendo ever fully recovered from that space world like 2001, right? Like where they show off what Zelda could look like on the GameCube.
Yeah.
And it looks amazing, high fidelity graphics. Ganon has like black fingernails. Like you can see the details on everything.
Right.
And the clash of the swords. And they built these expectations up for everybody. And then, like the next year or whatever, they show what Zelda's going to actually look like on the GameCube, and it was completely different.
Yeah.
And at first, I think a lot of people, right, they were like, "Oh, like a punch in the gut. What is this?" For those who stayed with it and played it, Wind Waker, like you said, it was a masterwork of a game. The most alive that I think any enemy in the world maybe has ever felt. And it was just amazing seeing the wind effects in the world and how everything kind of played out, and you could interact so well with everything. But it was the experience, I think, was a little tarnished at that point. It kind of cast a shadow that lingered forever. I don't think they really ever shed it until they released the Wind Waker HD for the Wii U, and then people could actually, I think, play it so far removed from that disappointment from launch, and experience it again for the first time the way it should have been.
Sure.
And it's an amazing experience.
I do think that the Twilight Princess was kind of their apology to everyone. Like they almost made it so dark to the point where, like, I think Majora's Mask is still the darkest in the series, but I felt like they were trying to evoke like a very serious and very dark tone with Twilight Princess, and I think they accomplished that. I think it brought back a lot of people, but yet still, I think that initial launch did absolutely hurt that system. What a great system! That opening, just booted up together. It's so cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really state of the art, and that sound effect became a part of our gaming life for a long time. Classics, right? Like Eternal Darkness, which I loved, and
Metroid Prime.
Oh, Metroid Prime, yeah,
best looking game.
Such a classic game. And I remember at the time also like following. I used to go on to IGN a lot when I was at that point in time. There was this editor there named Matt Casamassina, and I used to follow that dude. And he was always right on with his analysis and his projection of Nintendo and where they were going and how their games were. And I think our tastes kind of aligned because everything he recommended I loved. Things he said that he didn't really like, I didn't really like either.
Yeah.
But I remember him ranting and raving about Metroid Prime. It's one of the greatest games he's ever played. And I went and got it. And when I finally played it, he was 100% right. Man. Like that game just blew away so much of so many other games at the time. But I really like Baby Kite, which is an RPG for that system. The Resident Evil 4 that you mentioned.
This will make your table look bad.
Tales of Symphonia was a RPG for the system too.
Do your favor, I'll get it off, get it out of the site.
It had a lot of really good content.
Yeah, it really did.
That is ballsy negotiating.
GameCube launch of the Wii, Project Revolution, right?
Just should have stuck with that name, but
they should have. Yes, it should have been the Revolution. That would have been awesome. But I was really excited, hyped about that. When that came out, I was really excited too. I think that system had the potential to be the greatest system of all time. I think if it had the hardware to equal what PS3 and Xbox 360 were doing at the time, which I recently learned from Factor 5, an interview with a guy who was the president of Factor 5, was that the initial plans for the Wii were that it would actually have specs to be comparable to PS3 and 360. And they just at the last minute to focus on the controller aspect. But if it had that level of graphics, high definition graphics, what the library had in the motion control
the backwards compatibility was the big thing for me. Because that's what, honestly, like the motion control was really interesting, but when I thought of Revolution, that's what got me excited about that system. It's like, hey, I can play NES games, hey, I can play Super Nintendo games, hey, I'm even going to be able to play 64 games, and it's backwards compatible with the GameCube. I can play their entire legacy. Like, it's all in one system, so that's why I was like, stick with the Revolution. Like, stick with that code name. It's a great code name. And then they announced it as the Wii, I'm like... All right.
Yeah, well, it was Nintendo.
They do what they want.
So I really like the Wii. I played a lot of that stuff until the second half of that generation. And around the second half of that generation, I think is where it really started to show, like the difference in capability of what that system can do versus the horsepower and the speed of the other two systems.
Yeah, especially because 360 came out with their Elite console, which had an HDMI port, and PlayStation 3 was going down in price. It went down to a $400 price point, so more people were purchasing at that point. So you had basically all you had was first-party games that were worth anything. Like, they had crap ton of shovelware that's just the most garbage of garbage games that they put out there. And there's a few exceptions, like Boom Blocks is pretty fun and stuff like that, but like if it wasn't a first-party game, there was no point in picking it up on the Wii. So.
And then we went to the Wii U. I was kind of biggest of the Nintendo fanboys, right? Like growing up, Nintendo system, Nintendo kid, always loyal. They were always my first, and the Wii U, I think.
You're not actually, dude. I don't know.
As great as that system is, it ended up being one of the first party games that came out with. It really kind of broke my heart. Like, the Wii U broke my heart, right? Even at launch, the games they showed launch on.
Yeah, I remember talking to you just. I think it was a couple months ago, and you'd gotten a PS4 finally. Because you were like, no, I'm only sticking Nintendo, and you finally got a PS4, and you're like, I can't do Nintendo anymore. I just can't do it. Like, I just can't continue to support them.
Yeah, I was so frustrated with what Nintendo was giving us. When, I think there's a lot of people out there that feel the same way as me. There are probably a lot of people that don't, but, like, I wanted an open world, Super Mario game, not open world, but like more like an N64 Mario game with super high def graphics and really sophisticated engine. And we got Cat Mario, which was it was a good game. It was so great, but it was not the Mario game I was looking for.
Sure.
And my princess, I think, was another case with the system, right? Like,
yeah.
And it was like that with kind of almost everything they announced one by one.
He's got nice legs.
And I got a PS4 and I saw all these great games made by legendary developers that I was missing out on because I was trying to stay faithful to Nintendo. In the end, the Wii U ended up getting a good selection of really great first-party content.
Yes.
But that's really all I can say about this. I think it was great to see Nintendo in HD for the first time. Some of their games made for a great visual spectacle. But I'm glad that we are evolving into the next generation of Nintendo.
Yeah, absolutely. When they announced the Wii U, I was really, really upset. Like, I was like, what is this thing? Like, I knew it was a new console, but like, you look at the graphics, they were showing the Mario Land Ninja game where you throw ninja stars, and they were showing like a golf game where you like put the gamepad on the floor and use a Wiimote, and they were showing New Super Mario Bros. U, which looked almost exactly the same as New Super Mario Bros. I'm like, what is this? Like, this is
Mario game?
Awful. Well, we had already gotten two of those on the DS just that year. It was such a bummer, and the only reason I ended up picking up the Wii U as early as I did is because my Wii died just that year. Like, I was like, the Wii's dead. My son Hayden still likes to play the Wii. We have all these Wii games. I'm like, all right, well, I could spend $100 on the Wii, or I could spend an additional $200 and get the Wii U. So it was like a pros and cons thing. So that's why I ended up buying it basically at launch. Otherwise, I would have probably not skipped it. Probably would have waited for a while.
I was close. Like, I didn't get the Wii when it first came out. It was the first Nintendo system since the N64 that I didn't get at launch. So I was lined up for GameCube and Wii. I did not get the Wii U at launch. And when I finally got it, I built up a library of a couple games, and I was so frustrated with them that I actually sold the system and all the games. I was like, I'm not going to do Wii U this generation.
Sure.
And then I went back to it because I felt bad, and I loved it. I Nintendo, right? So I went back to it, and I'm glad I did because there were some great games that came out later. But I almost skipped it. I almost skipped it too.
Yeah, I mean, they just didn't have enough compelling features, horsepower. Like they were just making a misstep of the Wii again. And,
online play, like no ability to communicate with people. Still, even
friend codes, all that garbage. Like,
So that's the Wii U. But I'm very excited about what they just revealed with the Switch.
Yes.
Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, I wanted to get your hot take on the Switch. We talked about it on my podcast, this podcast, like 2 days ago with my buddy Josh. I just kind of want to see what you think of everything about it.
So I'm excited for it, right? Like super powered Nintendo tablet, right? That's basically what it is. Like, and you can play on the TV. So what I like about it is that a lot of Japanese developers have supported Nintendo's portable systems over the years. Their handhelds have been popular, and so they've got a lot of content and a lot of RPGs, a lot of Japanese flavored video games. And with this thing being a home console and a portable that you can then connect to your TV and play on the big screen, I foresee a lot of Japanese style RPGs and games we're going to be able to take on the go, but then also connect to your TV and play. That's awesome. Yeah. Like that gives me a lot of the type of games that I like to play. It seems like they have a lot of great support from third parties they've announced, at least at launch. If Beyond Good and Evil 2 ends up being an NX or a Switch exclusive, right?
We're all trying to transition over to that.
I'm trying to switch. Saying Switch. If it ends up being an exclusive, I think that's probably all I would need for the entire generation to be happy, right? They could do away with everything else, not release one other game for the entire 5 years. If they just said Beyond Good and Evil 2 is an exclusive, my purchase is justified.
All right, there you go.
So I'm very excited about the Switch. Looking forward to it. If they have some virtual console capabilities on that 6-inch screen in high resolution,
heck yeah, heck yeah,
that is going to be. It has the potential to be one of my favorite systems. So I'll keep going with PS4 for now, and also if I will get the Switch, I'll have both, and we'll see what happens. If they get enough content, maybe I'll go back to being a Nintendo exclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said before, we're at the Portland Retro Game Expo. We're waiting in line this whole time. That's why you're hearing ambient sound, people talking in the background. We come to this, I think it's the third year I've gone. You've come here how many years now?
I think this is my third time too, actually.
Third time, okay. What are you hoping to see in there? What treasure are you hoping to find?
Well, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So, like I think I'm trying not to blow a huge amount of money at this convention this year. It's hard when you love this stuff as much as we do.
Yeah.
But I'll be looking for some games for my CDI system.
CDI, all right.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to get some obscure gems there. Like I said, there's only like 19 or 20 games left on my 3DO. I'm not expecting to find any of those here. But maybe some 3DO like Japanese stuff, because you can get that stuff for pretty inexpensive. So just some kind of like oddities that you wouldn't really be able to find anywhere but a retro game convention.
Awesome.
And hopefully not blow a lot of money. I am in the hunt for an Amiga CD32, and a Turbo Duo would be nice, but they're really expensive. So maybe later for this.
Fair enough. All right, man. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. I really appreciate you being on here and kind of going over and reminiscing all of your old gaming memories.
Thank you for giving me the chance to kind of share all those memories. It was great talking about them again, and it's cool to have a friend that's into this as much as you are. And if anybody listens to this and they'd like to, they can visit my blog. You can just search 3D Overkill on Google. You'll find it. There hasn't been a lot of updates over the past year, but hopefully that'll change soon. And if anyone likes retro gaming or wants to learn more about 3DO, you can find it at 3D Overkill or 3D Overkill.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, John.
Thank you.